it's a great pleasure to welcome you here tonight to hear Ambassador Sumaida'ie, Iraq's ambassador to Washington, give a lecture on cultural heritage issues in Iraq today. The ambassador is well known to us insofar as he opened our gallery 18 months ago and took part in a number of events associated with that, much to our great pleasure on that occasion. He was born in Baghdad and resided there until 1960, whence he went on further to study at Durham University, where he obtained a degree in electrical engineering in 1965, before returning to Iraq to work with the Baghdad Electricity Board and the Iraqi Petroleum Company, before eventually leaving the country in 1973 to work in Europe. During that time in Europe, he worked on a number of business interests that took him all over the Middle East and involved, amongst other things, pioneering the use of computer design applications in Islamic architectural decoration and Arab calligraphy. Since 2004, he's been Iraq's permanent representative to the United Nations. In 2006, he moved to Washington to serve as Iraq's first ambassador to the United States in 16 years. He's had a distinguished career in politics. In 2004, before serving in the United Nations, he served as Minister of Interior in Baghdad, where he managed a domestic security force of over 120,000 and became a member of the Governing Council in Iraq, where he was chairman of the Media Committee and played a central role in founding Iraq's Telecom and Media Commission and the Public Broadcasting Institution. He is, without doubt, from our perspective, having been with him in the last hour and having known him for the occasion of the opening of our Iraq gallery, and in particular our gallery, a great friend to this museum, and in particular a great proponent of Iraq's cultural heritage and the issues surrounding it. So it's a great pleasure to welcome him to speak on that theme here tonight. Ambassador.
First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Thank the University of Pennsylvania and the museum for this wonderful opportunity to address this distinguished audience. I would like to thank you also, much more significantly, for the decades, now maybe a century and a half of work on the preservation and study of Iraqi heritage. This university has an unparalleled record in excavation, preservation, and documentation and study. Tremendous scholarship has always gone on here, which has helped to bring to life a lot of the things that were found in my country. For this, we are truly grateful. And we hope that this will continue on the basis of close collaboration between this venerable institution and our institutions in Iraq, which are trying to expand and establish themselves better. The next thing is a disclaimer. I'm no specialist. And it was perhaps foolhardy to come and try to address such a specialist audience. But those who are in the know will forgive me. And those who are not in the know, well, perhaps they will not notice. Rather than try to make this a technical presentation, I thought of just making it a series of reflections on the theme of Iraq's cultural heritage. Let's start with Antamina. Sumena is the name of a king, a Sumerian king of Lagash. And I got to know him more intimately, I would say, as a result of the tragedy of the looting of the Iraqi museum. The statue was actually removed from the Iraqi museum and was smuggled out to Syria. And after a period, after a hunt and a long story, it ended up in the United States, where it was confiscated and actually returned to Iraq, returned to the Iraqi embassy in July 2006. After we received it, it sat in my office for nearly 4 years. So I got to know it. And I wanted to learn more about it. It's not very tall, it's only 30 inches or so, without a head. Apparently it had lost its head some 4,000 years ago. It was actually made about 4,430 years ago. And it is of a king who ruled in a state, city-state, during the Sumerian period called Lagash. He was the son of Antina and the grandson of Ornina, who was the founder of the dynasty. He ruled for about 19 years. To look at it, it's made of black stone. It's not tall, it's not beautiful as sort of the statue of David or anything like that. But it had presence, solid, heavy, and movable. And how they moved it from the museum was amazing, because they couldn't actually lift it. So they dragged it, bouncing it on the steps of the museum, breaking every single step of marble, and managed to get it out. And there it was, not really particularly damaged. It has inscriptions on its shoulder to the front and an inscription on its back. And they are saying different things, as I will come to mention. During its reign, this king's reign, his reign, I should say, which lasted less than 20 years, he clocked up quite a number of achievements. He defeated Urluma, the rival city-state to the north, who tried to deflect the waters of the canal irrigating his kingdom. The first recorded war over water, certainly not the last. Arts and craftsmanship were at a very high standard, as witnessed by some of the pieces which are now in the Louvre, a particular silver goblet or vase inscribed by lions eating antelopes, and great craftsmanship. Remember, now we're talking about 4,450 or 30 years ago. But his most important achievement, I believe, was the construction of a canal that exists until today. We call it Shat al-Hay. It's a canal that brings water from river Tigris down to the river Euphrates, which served multi-purposes. First, it made Lagash independent of all the small canals which form the border between it and its surrounding states. And it also helped to bring the floodwaters of Tigris and irrigate the most southern areas of Somalia. In that time, to do such an achievement, you can imagine the sophistication of engineering, because the levels had to be right, and it had to work. But that was, in my opinion, sufficient to guarantee Antamina's place in history. He also did many things for his citizens. He annulled all their debts. He helped them improve economically, and he was a great advocate of reducing taxes. The state of Lagash didn't last too long after that. It continued for a few kings after that until the king Urukagina, I think that's the nearest pronunciation I can, who was a reformer, but ironically he was also defeated and politics changed. But I'll come back to those inscriptions on Antamina's statue. Then the statue would be placed in the temple facing the gods. And visitors to the temple would come from the door and would see the back of the statue. So they would read the inscription on the back. The inscription on the front would be read by the gods, presumably. And the tone is very different. The inscription on the front is full of supplication, obedience, promises, sweetness. The inscription on the back is warnings, admonition, and very harsh. Doublespeak, maybe the beginning of politics. Obviously, addressing two different audiences was recognized at that time, and a different way was felt appropriate for each. And that brings me to talk about this very developed civilization which existed at that time. We have learned so much about it from artifacts which were found, mostly clay tablets, inscribed in cuneiform writing. Many of them were found by this very university. And many of them actually are housed here in the museum. Through them, we can learn a great deal about the way the Sumerian lived, how they dealt with each other, the power structures that existed. And it's very instructive. The level of sophistication is absolutely amazing. We had a society which was clearly structured. Relationships were delineated. It was also productive. Productivity allowed a surplus of time for people to devote to art, to learning, to literature, managed to obviously support a whole class of priests and temple attendants, as well as the royalty. But gave them also spare time. And I believe it was during that time that the idea of a week was invented, with days for work and a day for rest, long before recognized religions. But this sophisticated productive and structured society, had certain features which are interesting to look at. The role of deity in the power structure. This is connected to the early Sumerians' worldview, how they came about, how they were they were living the way they did, and that was linked to their mythology and their tradition. And their system of belief was based on a deity which ordained everything, and they had to obey. And the kings were assigned power by the deity, and the priests made sure that the people are told that the kings are chosen by the deity. So there's alliance between the priesthood, royalty, which somehow keeps order. And this alliance worked. And therefore, there was a need for deity. If there was no deity, then any man is equal to any other man. There is no justification for somebody to be king and I am not king. Why should he be king? Now, we don't know about societies long before that, because we don't have the benefit of records. The Sumerians gave us the gift of writing, and therefore gave us the ability to at least understand how they lived and how they thought. But thinking about this relationship between religion and power is very interesting. Because if you fast forward to the Middle Ages, and you see in Europe the power of the church, and how many kings were dethroned or enthroned by the church. Fast forward, at about the same time, during the time of the Ottoman Empire, I remember in Istanbul, strolling around the Topkapi Museum, which was the palace of the Sultan. There is a part of the palace assigned for the harem, and over the door there's a big ceramic panel which is inscribed in Arabic. As-Sultan Dhillullah fil Ard. Translated means the Sultan, the king, is the shadow of God on earth. So, up to the time of the Ottomans, absolute rulers derived legitimacy from some divine assignment. And that's very important. But we should not look at this through a very narrow lens. Because that was, although it was necessary, it was not sufficient. The Sultan or the king or the ruler of the time had also to be just. Without justice, it was always he at that time, or almost always, tended to lose grip over his country. And this fact was illustrated again through situations where too many taxes were imposed, things went out of control in terms of balance between the rich and the poor, the powerful and the less powerful, and there were revolts and there were changes there was a regime change, but not brought about by external powers. this dynamic is really important, because now if we bring it to the modern time, we think that humanity, we can see that humanity is just beginning to free itself from the need for a deity to prop up a ruling regime. And I think this country, through its constitution, which separates clearly religion from the state, has led the way in this trend, and I think definitely it is a trend that will be long-lasting. But let us remember that for thousands of years, literally, it was always necessary to have some kind of a religious backing for any regime to have power. To illustrate the level of sophistication, I mentioned the construction of a canal, but there were schools, there were books, libraries, archives, catalogs. There were laws, and laws which were, we talk about Hammurabi law, which was roughly 1750 BC. But although many people think it was the oldest written law, it wasn't. In fact, there were laws, Sumerian laws, well before that, found on clay tablets, and there were clear legal codes. And they refer to, each of these codes used to have an epilogue and a prologue. Practically always at least have an epilogue. And in that, the king or the lawgiver refers to the fundamental basis on which he bases his law. And in one of them, the ruler, Urukagina, the one I mentioned before, who was the last ruler of that of the Lagash, that's 24th century BC, talked about restored the purpose of the law which he had written, which is a long time before Hammurabi. Remember, Hammurabi was the 18th century BC. This is the 24th century BC. Talked about restore justice and freedom to citizens, remove oppressive officials and bureaucrats. There was a problem with bureaucracy even then. Put a stop to exploitation, protect widows and orphans, protect the poor from the rich at that time. And before that, Ornamu, that's in the 20th century, I should say, sorry, after that, not before that, did the same and gave his law similar justification by saying that the king did away with some of the bureaucratic abuses. Bureaucrats used to abuse, especially the farmers and other classes of citizens, and regulated weights and measures, protected the weak against the strong. That's a theme always when it comes to legislation. And the king Lepet-Ishtar of Isin, later still closer to Hammurabi time, and he describes himself as especially selected by Enlil, the two major gods of the time, again reinforcing his legitimacy in the eyes of the people through deity, that he came to establish justice in the land, to banish complaints, to turn back enmity and rebellion by force of arms. The fear was always that when things went wrong, people would rise up and revolt against the king, against the established order. And the only way to prevent that is to be just, is to actually exercise justice. And laws documented and institutionalized that. So that became an important instrument for stabilizing political power. And that's the reason they were invented. They were not invented just for the sake of being intellectual. They were invented for a political purpose. That's to stabilize society. And finally, Lipit Ishtar, after mentioning all the other reasons why he is legislating, he's issuing these laws, and he said, and to bring well-being to the citizens generally. Well-being is a very broad sense of feeling good about themselves. At that time, this is long before Moses, long before our religions told us what to do and what not to do. The gods of that time, which is basically people speaking on behalf of gods through priests and the clergy, their clergy, they extolled the good, the just, truth and righteousness, and justice and compassion. All these words were used to signify values that were cherished by society and therefore supported and cherished by the state. So we are talking about this society which was generally stable, although it actually entered into wars every now and then, had structures of power which were very clear. The rulers had almost absolute power, but not really absolute power. When it came to decisions of war and peace, they did not take the decisions themselves. There is a tablet which talks about a situation in which one of these city-states was under threat of war by its neighbor. And the threat was, submit to our demands and you will have peace. If you don't submit, we will invade. The king went to his Congress, and they actually, this is 3000 BC, had a two-chamber assembly. A Senate, if you like, of the elders, and the House of Representatives for men of arm-bearing age, men who can fight. He went first to the Senate and laid out the problem before them and asked them, what do you advise? They, being conservative and worried about their wealth, probably, they advised them to give in and submit to the conditions of their neighbor and thereby avoid the destruction of war. The king vetoed that and went to the House of Representatives and laid out the problem before them. They took a different decision. They decided to fight for their independence. And so the king endorsed their decision. This is an illustration of power politics at that time, which was amazingly sophisticated for a society that we think of as 5,000 years ago. What kind of society would you have? fact, there are societies in the 20th century, in the 21st century, which are now run in a way far, far more uncontrolled than this. So what we want to take away from this is that society we had in Iraq was really mature in its value system, in its power structures, perhaps not technologically, although technologically they made huge advances, but it was prosperous, it was productive, and it was sustainable. And people had a high quality of life. They had poetry, they had literature, they had literary discussions, and they sent their kids to school, especially a certain class. If you are a farmer out in the country, you probably didn't send your son to school. But there were people who were proud scribes or archivists, and equivalent of some of people here in this university for that time, and they sent their children to school, and they had to go through exams, and once they graduate as a scribe, then they would be assured a good job, either in the temple or in the palace, and so on. And they had a system of justice, they had a system of ethics, they had their labor disputes and labor organizations. In terms of their productive systems, their agriculture, for example, we have amazing records of almanac for that time, saying basically a manual for the farmer what to do in every season and what sequence the work has to be done. And going into minute details about how to prepare the field, how to sow the seed, and in fact talking about sowing the seed, they're talking about an attachment which is attached to the plow so that the seed can be sowed as the plowing takes place. And when I read about this, I'm in awe at the human ingenuity at such an early stage of history. And now we have to struggle to get people to get along and to stop squabbling and be productive. This idea, this other theme that I wanted to touch upon in this conversation, the first one was the role of deity in this. The other is the productivity of people is very important in terms of social development. When a society is prosperous, it has room to allocate for the arts, for intellectual pursuit. Mathematics, for example, was at that time so sophisticated that there is a tablet which has on it a proof of what is now generally referred to as the Pythagoras theorem, 1,300 years before Pythagoras, the Greek. So they had the time to allocate for that. But the other idea I want to touch upon is social mobility. For those societies to continue to be productive, there was this value attached to a son taking up the profession of the father. And they had this vertical system of learning or passing knowledge from generation to generation. That continued actually for thousands of years, and as we come closer to the modern age, it has broken down. Now, of course, we don't have the same level of dedication of sort of generation to the previous generation, and also there is much more social mobility. At that time, social immobility was an advantage to productivity. It came to a point when it is no longer an advantage. It became an impediment, and therefore society has freed itself from it. But I think this was a theme that was what was remarkable at that time. And although there were examples of change in social position, but generally there was less social mobility. Coming to the present day, we have a great deal to learn from our ancestors. We in Iraq, in particular, have a great deal to learn from our ancestors. But in order to learn from them, we have to study them better. And we have to relate to what they did. Anything I learned about the civilizations that preceded us, and I have not obviously here touched on the many civilizations that came to Iraq after that, in particular the Islamic civilization, the center of which was Baghdad, the city in which I was born. And the level of sophistication that civilization reached, and the contributions it made to world civilization. And that is a subject for another lecture. I'm not hunting for another invitation. But even without touching on that, I feel so proud that this small part of the world, my country, Iraq, has made this gigantic contribution to world civilization. And things that people take for granted every day, if you dig deeper, you find they actually originated there. The examples abound, but this is not the time for examples. It's the time to talk about a general theme. I believe I have spoken for long enough. Thank you very much, and I hope you can ask some questions.
Well, Ambassador, if I might begin with the questions. You were trying to draw a comparison between 3,000 years ago and today. I wonder, in your lifetime, and I read out your biography, have you seen changing approaches to Iraqi culture, to its past, when you were in the 1950s and the 1960s on the one hand, when you were abroad on the other, now you've been back in another capacity? Have you perceived that culture differently in those three major episodes in your own life?
Thank you. Another theme I have not had time to touch upon is the theme of regression in society. Very often a society would make leaps forward, and then it would regress. And again, examples abound. I'll give you one example. In the penal code, in the most ancient penal code we have on record, it was, again, I emphasize this was long before recognized religions as we know them now. It was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, in punishment for aggression. During a later Sumerian period, where society was much gentler, much more sophisticated, much more, if you like, humanistic, this was replaced by a punishment by a fine. at that very early time, only to revert back to the more brutal punishment later when society became much more hard. This small example illustrates the ability of societies to go forward, but also to go back. Take this on a larger scale. Iraqi society, this great civilization, this great, really, really sophisticated, and I emphasize sophisticated here, civilization that existed thousands of years ago. And again, in what you call in Europe the Dark Ages, was the Golden Ages for us in the 9th century, 10th century. In the year 1900, Iraq was reduced from a peak population of estimated to be 35 million during the Abbasid period to a mere 1 million. Less than 1 million in the year 1900. After centuries of wars, and famine, and total destruction. So Iraq had to rise again like a phoenix from the ashes. So now, learning about our ancient history, it's not that there is continuity. It is an opportunity for us to be inspired by it. To say, if our ancestors could manage that at that time, now we can do much better with the aid of modern technology, knowledge, and communication. Yes, sir.
Is there a sense of national pride in history throughout Iraq, that honoring their artifacts, honoring their history? Is there knowledge and embracing of that culture of your history by the general masses?
I would say there is more pride than knowledge. But there definitely is a pride. And I cannot overemphasize the anguish with which the looting of our museum was greeted with.
I was wondering, going back and taking inspiration from the past, Saddam did a similar attack with those civilizations. What do you see for a danger if a political power, in a very manipulative way, goes back and brings inspiration? Some would see it as a progress, but I would see it and hear it as a catastrophe.
Well, you said it. Manipulation. Saddam wanted to actually deconstruct the Gate of Ishtar using brick, each one of them having his name imprinted on it. Now that is terrible, and we know it's terrible. But that's what dictators do. I understand Gaddafi did something even more outrageous. He had some of the phrases out of his green book actually engraved on huge slabs of stone, 20, 30 tons each, and then sunk into the Mediterranean Sea, so that future generations might discover them. You know, megalomania, what do you do about it? The best thing is to remove these people. But that's different from a whole nation having pride, true pride, in the achievements of their ancestors. And when I talked about Antina, at that time, within a reign of 19 years, 20 years, managed to dig up a canal to connect the Tigris to the Euphrates and have that actually work as an irrigation. That's amazing. So now I wonder, an average Iraqi would say, if Antina could do that, why can't we get electricity to every house now?
I would say they are not related by ancestors at all.
Well, they are not related in what sense?
In ancestors. Maybe they are not.
I think,
Maybe you can create an ancestry relationship, but
yes, but
probably they are not.
But I think there is definitely a link. I accept the point only very partially. Iraq has been the confluence of many migrations, but the core remained. The core, many people will now argue, and maybe in the future through linguistic or even DNA studies, might illustrate, and I have no proof of that Sumerian blood still exists, especially in the marshes, that area. That's not, even their way of life has not changed for at least a couple of thousand years. And the influx of other nations has managed to enrich rather than impoverish the local stock. So I would say that we still have a lot of the DNA of those guys who were in Iraq at that time.
Ambassador, I admire your optimism.
I'm accused of it. It's an accusation.
Other question?
Do you find that the cultural discourse that's going on now, in that discourse, that there is tension between this very rich, ancient past that you so wonderfully illuminated for us today, and the more recent Islamic cultural traditions? Is there competition? Is there tension between the deep past, the pre-Islamic past, and the Islamic past, so that some monuments are more valued than other monuments, or in fact is the whole embraced?
I would say the short answer is that the whole is embraced. To sort of expand on that a little, is that in both epochs, the ancient and the intermediate, there were dark passages. And there were magnificent, glorious passages. During the Islamic period, we had a period of real intellectual freedom. I can describe them as, in modern sort of terminology, as a very liberal society. Tremendous progress in science, literature, humanities, philosophy, and likewise in the ancient history. What obviously we need to do is to try and derive inspiration from the better side of our history. Actually, if you look at the history of any nation, whether it is Iraq or any other nation, you will find both. You will find dark passages, and you will find some great passages. We believe we are particularly blessed by the richness and the depth of our historical record, that we have so much to choose from.
Ambassador, I wonder whether you might think it better politics and better history to celebrate Iraq as a multinational place, multiple sets of diverse ethnic ancestries, rather than one set of collective ancestors.
I don't know how to read your question. Iraq has never been a singular ethnicity country. In those early periods that I spoke about, at the time of the city-state, you could argue that the city-state was a very homogeneous state. But even then, they had slaves, and many of the slaves were actually brought from other places. And that soon broke down by the Akkadians who came and conquered Sumer, and then the Assyrians who came from the north, very different stock. And the Babylonian. And if you follow the progression, Iraq became an alphabetic soup. It was a melting pot in reality. Everybody had a corner of the room to claim, but the room actually included all. So it depends how you like to look at it. If you look at it, this is my spot and I'm sticking to it, fine, you can stick to it. If you look at it in a broader sense, you find that every part of this collective society has benefited actually from being a part of the larger collective society. Then you look at it in a different way. I tend to look at it in the latter way. So I'm now accused of both being optimistic and being nationalistic.
Being mono-nationalist.
Not mono, no. I certainly acknowledge and delight in the fact that we have a multiplicity of nationalism, and I celebrate that. I certainly do not ascribe a mono-nationalism to Iraq, but I do celebrate and advocate also an Iraqi identity.
Please. Yes, you've already mentioned several interesting examples of technological advances in the ancient world. I'm just wondering, inasmuch as you are an engineer by your training, do you have any special expectations for further research to shed more light upon the science and technology of ancient Iraq and its place in the society?
Well, that's a whole big topic, and I'm certainly no specialist. But I am informed that some civilizations in the Americas continued for many, many centuries, thriving and progressing without using the wheel for transport. And if we say that Iraq, which is credited by the invention of the wheel, made only that contribution to technology, then maybe that's enough claim. But there were many technological achievements in, for example, the smelting of metals very early. I mean, I don't know if you count the brewing of beer as a technological achievement. Some might claim it is.
Please. Ambassador, I'm hardly to hear about the story of the return of the statue of Antina. How has the return of other antiquities been? Is the Iraq Museum back up to where it was pre-2002, or are we getting a lot of international cooperation with that?
Alas, it is not back to what it was, but we are on the way. Last September, I took home our grandfather, Antina, back to Iraq, together with about 1,000 artifacts. Not all as important as Antina. In fact, it was the most important piece, but it included a lot of important items. And before that, we had another batch, smaller batch. Now I have something like 35, 36 clay tablets, which we have retrieved, and I am ready to take them back. So we'll keep making progress, and there is cooperation now with, from American authorities. So we keep making progress, and now we monitor all important sales of antiques in the world. And when anybody spots an Iraqi item, we are alerted, and our systems go into action mode. Yes, sir.
The average man on the street, in his self-identification process, what citizen of Iraq?
It's probably different for different people. And it's also different at different times. Let me just elaborate. 2-3 years ago, when there was a lot of sectarian strife, during that time of tension and strife, probably people were thinking more of what sect they belong to. But that is a transient situation. I believe the permanent situation is the identity of being an Iraqi. During 2006, 2007 in Washington, I said again and again that Iraq has caught sectarianism like someone might catch a flu. It is possible to recover from it. I believe Iraq will recover from it because it actually goes against the grain. We have lived for thousands of years as a society of different people. In my childhood, our neighbors were Jewish. We used to visit them in their holidays, and they used to visit us in our holidays. I grew up at school with students that I never even conceived of asking them whether they are of this sect or that sect. And some of them are still my friend to this day, and I still don't know what sect they are. And I don't want to know. Right?
I was wondering if you can speak about, in your opinion, the extent to which the heightened interest in Iraq's ancient history in late 20th century, 70s, 80s, was a means of forming a distinct Iraqi identity in the face of pan-Arabism as a political tool?
I'm not sure I caught your question.
Okay. I guess I'm just wondering if you think this is a reasonable way to view like Saddam's focus on the ancient history in the context of the political climate and the pan-Arabism of the time, and as a way of answering pan-Arabism and saying, no, we're Iraq, we're more than just this pan-Arab identity, we're a distinct nation.
You know, identity is a complex thing. It's multi-layered, as the gentleman said. And it just depends which layer is on top at any point in time. And sometimes they switch places. But, you know, the fact that Iraqis identify as Iraqis does not in any way take away from the fact that Arabs feel that they are Arabs, Kurds feel they are Kurds, Christian, Syrians feel very proud of their own heritage. These identities actually coexist and I would say complement each other. In Iraq, you know, there is something called Iraq, and I believe recently there was, I just heard about a new discovery of a bowl with an inscription inside it. It might be the oldest actual reference to the word Iraq. And that's around 1,000 years BC, or maybe less, 500, between 500 and 1,000. I think scholars are still researching that. But certainly, in my reading of Arab literature of the 6th and 7th century, there's plenty of reference to Al-Iraq, which is Iraq, in Arabic language. So, you know, Iraq is not, as some have been writing and saying, is an artificial country which has just been invented by the British after the Ottoman Empire was destroyed. It actually existed long run down like all other systems in the country. And we recognize that unless we improve education, Iraq cannot move forward. Now, think of this. Children of 14 years and younger represent about 40% of the Iraqi population. We are a nation of children. Many of them, unfortunately, are orphaned. Many of them are going without proper education. Many are going without any education. That's a disaster. Now, when I graduated from high school, at the risk of dating myself, in 1960, I won a scholarship, and the government of Iraq sent me to study at the cost of the government to England. And when I and others, about 200 students were sent on scholarship, when we arrived there, we found ourselves much better at maths, much better at the sciences than our English counterparts. We were, the language was our problem, because we couldn't speak English. But with maths, we had no trouble. So at that time, 1960, the standard of teaching in Iraq was very high. Now it's down to the bottom. And the big challenge now is to bring up education at all its stages, from primary school to university. Universities were cut off from the world during the 15 years of sanctions. In fact, many universities, including Baghdad, for nearly 2 decades or more, had no access to even academic journals. So they were frozen in time. The world has moved on. The brain drain is another problem, because the teachers, the engineers, top academics, most of them have left the country. So we have to create the conditions for them to come back. So the School of Architecture in Baghdad has produced fantastic architects. One of the most famous architects in the world is Zaha Hadid. She's a graduate of the Baghdad University School of Architecture, and now she's acknowledged as an authority. So we have a lot to catch, a lot of ground to catch up on.
Prima, one last question.
Yeah,
And I know you have to get back.
Another last question.
it's a very short question. In your opinion, which country has the best education system, and which
country has the
best education system?
best education?
Best education system. Prima runs our international classroom.
Well, I thought in this speech, I managed to stay out of trouble. And then the last question you want to catch me out. I really don't have the data